Okay, ladies and gentlemen, installment 2 of climate change, the effects of climate change. Fun fact for the day, Mr. Fuller's height, 6'1". 6'1". So, that's good. I got that going for me. Where are we going to begin? What happened there? Okay, so, here we go. Changes in rainfall. So there are more and more areas of extreme drought and more areas of extreme flooding than ever before. Look what's happening in California. They've been in severe drought for forever. We've also got this thing called the Ogallala Aquifer. I think it's on the slide later on, which is how we irrigate the Midwest, which is where we grow corn and wheat, and all that's being depleted in the United States. So areas of extreme drought increase from 15 to 30% of the Earth's surface. While at the same time, we've got areas like Bangladesh that are constantly being flooded. Africa, one of the places most affected by climate-related drought. You can see the ground they're standing on is almost like bone dry, like clay gets. Really, really hard because it's just been in drought for so long. So drought in some areas, floods in others. Here's Florida. When was this? I think this was, what, like 2005 maybe? Melbourne, 24 days above 95 degrees. The nighttime temperatures in Tampa remained above 80 for 12 days. And we had so many lakes that just went dry that had never been dry before. There were people in Lake Okeechobee who were out there, these anthropologists, looking at the remains of Native Americans because they'd never been able to get to them before because they were never exposed. But in this intense drought, they could get in there and dig all this stuff up. So it was crazy. Sea level will rise. We will experience 2 to 6.5 feet by 2100. Okay, now here's the most important part right now. When all of the ice that is on the planet melts, sea levels will go up by 20 feet. But by 2100, we will still have some ice in the Arctic and the Antarctic, right? So where is this 2 to 6.5 feet sea level rise going to come from? And 2/3 of it is going to come from thermal expansion. And that is a huge thing to understand, okay? The majority of sea level rise by 2100 will come from thermal expansion. Meaning, if you add heat to something, that something has more energy. And each molecule now can move farther apart from the one next to it. So it gets bigger. If you add heat to metal, that metal will expand. If you take that metal and put it in the freezer, it will contract. So the majority of sea level rise by 2100 will come from thermal expansion. More heat equals faster moving water molecules. So land-based ice leads to sea level rise. This is another big point, okay? Is there another bullet? No? Okay. So when you have ice that is already in the ocean, ice is less dense than water. That's why it floats. So when it melts, it will actually so sea-based ice will actually cause a small decrease in sea level when it melts. Okay, think of it as the volume has already been accounted for because the ice is in the water. Land-based ice, when that melts, that is going to cause a significant increase in sea level rise because that's water that has not been accounted for yet. So this is what you see the effects over here, and this is a map showing what the planet's going to look like when the sea level actually rises. You can see right here, there's going to be an ocean going through the middle of the United States of America. Florida is gone. Africa, we lose a ton of Africa. South America, look at Europe and the Middle East, crazy. So if you note though, we have oil in these areas of the United States already, right? Oil only forms in the ocean. There are oceanic organisms that form oil. Coal forms on land. So we know that this has already happened in the past before because we have oil deposits in this area of Texas and the Midwest. So it's going to return to that when all the ice melts. So beach erosion, we're losing 1 to 10 feet of beach in Florida per year. You can see the change in this barrier island in this 20-year period from 69 to 70 to 89. 2004, we spent $535 million renourishing beaches, but we get so much back in terms of tourism, people coming to the beaches of Florida, that we can justify spending that amount of money. What are the negative impacts of beach renourishment? First thing, we go right off the coast and we dredge these areas and then bring the sand up here. So we're going into the neritic zone, right, that coastline zone of the ocean, destroying it to put the sand over here. And I don't know if you guys recall, but you remember when we said that 90% of the ocean's organisms live in that neritic zone? So if we're going through there and destroying these habitats, we're going to have a huge impact on the ocean's organisms, right? 90% spend all or a portion of their life in that neritic zone, and we're going through and dredging it. Sea turtles, they can't dig through that compacted sand that we throw on there and then spread with heavy equipment, so they don't dig as deep and they lay their eggs, and then they get washed up and get taken out to the ocean. Plus, that compacted sand is not as good as holding on to surrounding air molecules, and when they do dig, it changes the temperature of the nest, which then changes the sex ratio of the offspring. I can't remember what it is. It's like if an egg is warmer, it becomes a male. If it's cooler, it becomes a female. Something like that. Basically, what we're doing is we're making all the eggs colder by compacting it, getting rid of the air insulation, and in doing that, we're making all of the eggs one sex. So this is Cape Hatteras. They just moved this lighthouse back 2,800 feet, but they're losing the coastline at 12 feet per year, so they're going to have to move it again in the future. Melting of ice and permafrost, again, that decreases the Earth's albedo. Land ice melting is going to add to sea level rise and reduce water for people who rely on glacial melt every spring for their water. If you live in an alpine environment, right, when that water melts, the ice melts in the spring, there's your drinking water for the rest of the year. So if there's no more ice there ever, no more drinking water. As I was saying earlier in the previous presentation, as the permafrost in Russia continues to melt, all of that land becomes very soggy and wet, and the trees start to lean. And they lean on each other, right? And that's why they call them drunken trees, because everything's leaning and falling over. And the ice that goes over this permafrost, okay, is holding in that methane. These researchers went there and they pounded a few holes into the ice, and then the methane was just coming out of it. And since it's a flammable gas, they were lighting it on fire, so you could see the methane coming right up out of the ice. It's a large CH4 release. Nice. The present-day shoreline is right here. This is where it will be as we are on our way to that increase of 20 feet. And again, we'll lose all of this when we get to that 20 feet. Human health, the warmer the weather, the farther north pest insects and organisms can move. As it gets warmer, the pythons in the Everglades are going to make their way up into Georgia, over to Alabama, which would be crazy. The malaria-carrying mosquitoes have already moved farther north. I think we had 10 cases last year in the state of Florida of malaria, which we typically don't. So these types of diseases will spread. Extreme heat waves in areas that are not used to having a lot of heat. They may not have central AC. They may not have AC at all. So all of a sudden they get pounded by an intense heat wave. Can lead to extreme deaths. So in 2003, the heat wave that hit Europe, it caused more than 52,000 deaths in Europe and 1,500 deaths in India. Here's the typical range of malaria, and it will spread north of the equator and south of the equator as it gets warmer. More hurricanes, stronger hurricanes, and I know people are saying already, well, we haven't heard of any hurricanes here recently, and so how can there be more and stronger ones? Well, that's because none of them have hit the U.S. But if you were to look at the other countries that these hurricanes are hitting, ones, usually they're a third world country that we don't really care about, so they're not on our news radio, because we'd rather talk about Justin Bieber. They're out there, and they're beating the crap out of these other countries. We just don't hear about them in our news. But they're out there. Threat to biodiversity, increase in plant and animals able to adapt. Okay, so the animals that are most capable of adapting are the ones that we consider weeds. That we consider pests. So weeds, cockroaches, fire ants, ticks, those things are going to spread. The ones that are endemic species, they survive just one little area, those are the ones that are going to die off, and we'll lose those species, 70% of them. And the biological clocks that control migration, which we talked about in the last presentation, birds, whales, caribou, they'll really be affected because the timing for the plants they eat while they're migrating is all going to be messed up. So we're going to lose the corals, right? Because the corals that exist now in the neritic zone at the coastline, the current coastline is going to become pelagic zone or deep ocean, and there'll be no sunlight there, so the corals will die. Current wetlands will be gone. New wetlands will be created. The alpine habitats will be too warm to have any ice or snow, so there'll be no alpine habitat. We'll lose the cold areas like the tundra, but the temperate deciduous forests, those will increase and spread and take over where the tundras used to be. And we'll lose a lot of polar bears. So why are we going to lose polar bears? Polar bears hunt seals, and they hunt them from sea base ice that stretches off of the land. So they come down from the land, go out into the sea base ice, and the seals make little dens underneath these thin spots of ice. These polar bears can smell them, sniff them out, and they walk out into the ice and then pound through the ice, grab them, and rip them through the ice. If there's no sea base ice anymore, then they can't hunt. And up in the far north, there's not much up there except polar bears. So if they're not hunting seals, there's nothing for them to eat. So they'll starve to death and they will die. Thank you for showing up to 19.2.